Welcome to the Election Protection Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Finlay, Director of the Election Protection Project, and we are brought to you today by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We are joined by Minnesota State Representative Patty Anderson. Representative Anderson, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh.
Now, you're the Vice Chair of the Fraud and Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee in Minnesota. That is a mouthful, but tell us essentially what that committee does and why it's relevant to election integrity.
Well, we said it was set up just this year. As you may know, we have a tie in the House. But at the time that we were electing a speaker, when we came in about 10 months ago, the Democrats were down one representative because the person that ran for that seat, ironically, didn't live in the district. So there is a huge problem. And so it became a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court said, hey, he's not eligible. He doesn't live in the district. So we elected our speaker. We set up the fraud committee because, as you may know, there is a huge amount of fraud going on in Minnesota, not just, we're going to talk about elections today, but within a lot of the public policy, specifically Medicaid and Medicaid expansion programs. It's incredible what's happening in the state.
That's exactly right. There's a lot to clear up in Minnesota. Before we dive into that, though, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in politics. And
originally, before this.
Yes, definitely. We want to hear it all.
Yeah, well, I'm a business person, and I've been kind of in and out of politics too. I was a city council member and a mayor, and a long time ago, I was actually the state auditor in Minnesota in the early 2000s, and back when we were more purple state, when we had statewide offices. So I served as state auditor, and then I left politics. I was commissioner for a little bit when Plenty, his last term, Governor Plenty, who was our last elected Republican officer so far. Although we keep winning, we keep getting very close. We're like 1% elections. That's why this is so important to states like Minnesota, election integrity. And so I just, about 4 years ago, I saw what was happening. In the state, just incredible. We've got socialists getting elected and knocking out what we used to be considered liberal Democrats, out of Minneapolis. It's now run by the socialists. And you see that sort of thing going on, with our elected representatives too. And Tim Walz is our governor. He is running for a third term, and we'll see what happens. So we've got some great candidates here that are running. I'm a Republican, obviously. So, yeah.
Definitely. Well, and Representative Anderson, Minnesota has a long history of election integrity issues.
Yes.
Right? Going back to, the Senate race with Norm Coleman.
Yeah.
Election integrity has been a key issue in the state. Now, because it's trended purple for the last few years, mostly since 2020. It hasn't gotten the same focus as your kind of northern neighbors, Michigan and Wisconsin, states like that. But you've made some headlines recently with some big election integrity footage in your committee. Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so we had the Secretary of State's office in for just to testify. We were actually originally looking at the fact that there is a federal investigation that has happened. There are over 500 fake ballots that were done through voter registration. They were all fake. There was a federal case that came in here, and the two folks that did the fake registrations pled guilty, to the whole thing. But it's a question: how did that happen? And in this case, it was a nonprofit was paying these people to go out and register voters, and ironically, 99% of their funding, this nonprofit, comes from the state, comes from the Department of Health and other entities. So the state taxpayers are paying for people to go out and do fraudulent voting. So that it started out really that the hearing was about that, but it became much bigger. As the elections director and the Secretary of State were in testifying, and we started talking about just fraudulent registrations, period, and the whole issue with driver's licenses. And there was some shockers, as you know, that came out of that hearing.
Well, and this is such a big issue nationally, right? For two
Mhm.
reasons. One is voter ID laws. You know, what we
We
know
don't have
through,
that here.
well, that's right. You
Yeah.
know, you don't have it there, and there are a lot of states that don't have it, but the
Mhm.
polling that's been done shows that Republican, Democrat, across the board, it's an 80% issue,
Oh,
right? People
absolutely.
think
Yeah.
there should be voter ID laws.
Yeah.
It also intersects with non-citizen voting, as we're going to
Mhm.
talk about in a little
Mhm.
bit, or only citizen voting,
Right.
as we like to call it, right? Again, an 80% issue. This one's actually more like 87 or
Mhm.
89%
Mhm.
of people that think that only citizens should vote in elections.
Mhm.
So in Minnesota, right, the question is, you had these 500 to 600 fraudulent voter registrations
Right.
and no ID law. How did this happen? How were they able to get these voter registrations across?
Well, they just do it. So they go out and in this case, they created fake, and these aren't individual. This is two people that did it, right?
Yep.
And what they do is then they send it in through a nonprofit into the Secretary of State's office, and that's different than the whole ID, the whole driver's license issue, and so on. And the fact that in Minnesota, anyone can get a driver's license. We give them to illegal immigrants here as of 2023, when we had the DFL trifecta for 2 years, and now it's gone. But so you can, but in the case of these fraudulent ballots, they just went, did it, created them, put fake information in, sent them into the Secretary of State's office. And the Secretary of State's, they sent it out to the counties. And it was just like, a couple counties started kind of questioning things. And we have 87 counties in this state. And so, they're all over the place. And these are just the ones that were found from these two particular people. So it
Right.
isn't everything. It's just
That's right.
little tiny bite. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so a couple of things about this. One is, presumably, if there were stronger voter ID laws when you're going to register to vote, it could have helped prevent this.
Absolutely.
The other thing, though, is from what I understand, this nonprofit group, what was caught were the ballots or the registrations
Right.
by these two individuals, but they have not questioned all of the registration forms that this nonprofit has turned in. So we don't know the extent of the
Correct.
fraud. Is that right?
That's correct. And it's also, it took the feds to come in and investigate. I mean, technically, it's supposed to be the county attorney, so the Secretary of State's office, but that doesn't happen here in Minnesota forever. Just like the other financial fraud that's going on, it's been the feds that have been coming in and doing the job.
Well, and unfortunately, that is a big theme that we see in election integrity and something that we're fighting for. That, there is no disincentive. There's no incentive for prosecutors to prosecute this
Right.
if they don't want to.
Mhm.
There is no disincentive for local election administrators to run bad elections or clean up their bad elections if they don't want to. There's no accountability there,
Yeah.
I guess
it's
is what
not.
I'm saying. And
It's
that's
really
a
not.
problem.
And
Yeah.
we're one of, just 3 states that have we don't have to follow this. We got to, anyway, we got approved to not follow it essentially. And so,
That's right.
That's a whole nother issue. I'm also on the Legislative Audit Commission. As a former state auditor, it makes sense. And in the legislative auditor came in and did an audit of the voter rolls. Looked at 2016 and 2018. There were 32,000 that were bad. 32,000 bad registrations that didn't match with the Social Security database. That didn't match with a HAVA. The legislative auditor is coming in to do this again, and the legislative auditor is separate from the executive branch of government. So that's how we're able to, have somebody look at this stuff. So
Right. Well, that's incredible. 32,000.
32,000 in a state where we have, the Senate, the House is tied. The Senate is one Democrat. Out of 201 legislators, it's 100 to 101 in this state. That's how close things are. And so it matters. It really matters.
It absolutely does. Well, that leads us to the point where we should talk about the footage that happened at your hearing the other day, right? You brought up matching social security numbers and things like that for voter registrations and IDs. Let's start. Tell us the process to get a driver's license in Minnesota. You passed a law, I guess, a couple of years ago, driver's licenses for all.
Yep.
Let's start there and tell us how you get a driver's license.
All right. So in 2023, when there was a DFL trifecta under Governor Walz, they passed a law that says that anyone can get a driver's license. You don't need identification. You don't even need an address. So technically, you could say at the corner of, First and, Second Avenue. That's where I live. But you don't even need a house or an address. So they passed this law. You can go into any driver and vehicle system and get a driver's license. We tried to amend the bill numerous times to say, hey, it should say not for voting or non-citizen or something. And nope, that was not, they just didn't want to do that. So a driver's license for an illegal or an immigrant who's not a citizen looks exactly the same as a driver's license for a citizen in the state of Minnesota. And it is a government-issued photo ID.
Yeah, so just to recap, anybody can get a driver's license in Minnesota. Citizen, non-citizen, doesn't matter. You get it, and it is the exact same driver's license. Correct.
Yep. And what happened at the hearing, the elections director, we were talking about this, and so someone could register to vote, attempt to, either have no social, which they don't need to do that, okay, or wrong social, and so maybe it gets flagged in the system as, they need to be confirmed, and then they can go in to vote, and as long as they show their photo ID, their driver's license, that's good, and then they're good in the system. They're done. It's not flagged anymore. It's very simple.
Right. And when you asked the director of elections about this, he said, well, look, whenever anybody registers to vote, they attest that they're a citizen. Right. So what's your response to that?
Well, we have at a station, we do not have provisional ballots in Minnesota. So they're automatically in the system. They're attesting. So yes, it is illegal for them to say they're a citizen or to say that but we have seen that doesn't matter to a lot of folks, right? I'll give you a little example right south of us, Iowa, right? We have all watched as the superintendent of the school district in Des Moines. He's been voting for 2 decades in 2 different states. He's an illegal immigrant with a order to be deported. It's,
That's exactly right. And you essentially cornered the director of elections on this, right? And you asked him point blank, does this mean that people who are non-citizens can vote in Minnesota elections? What was his response to this?
Well,
I think we just need to put it on the record.
You have to watch the video, but I asked him numerous times over and over. He wouldn't say yes. He would say, he'd work around it, and then I would say, so the answer is yes. And then he wouldn't say anything. So it was very clear the answer was yes. He just didn't want to say yes, illegals can vote, in Minnesota elections. So, but the fact is that they can, and their votes counted. And, that's just how it is. And if they're challenged, they would have to be challenged by a poll worker or someone who's there to watch the ballots. And the odds of that are pretty low, but even still, it's still there. It counts.
That's exactly right. And we're going to include that footage in this podcast because I think everybody needs to see it.
We give driver's licenses to anyone here. You don't have to be a citizen. You don't have to, which is a photo ID. So if someone comes in, they register, they have the driver's license, but they have an incorrect social or no social or whatever. So then they become incomplete. But if they walk in to vote with their driver's license, does that make them all of a sudden now okay?
Mr. Linnell. Madam Chair, so the designation on the roster for someone whose registration had been incomplete, if they present the election judge with that acceptable identification document, that would clear the challenge from the roster and they would be permitted to cast a ballot.
Mr. Anderson?
Well, okay, there's your problem potentially. So thank you.
So just to clarify, someone who is not a citizen but presents a driver's license at that point in the process could be permitted to vote.
Madam Chair, at the time of registration, as well as at the time of submitting a ballot, every voter is signing the attestation affirming their eligibility to vote, including that they meet all eligibility requirements, that they are a U.S. citizen. If it's determined then that the voter was not in fact eligible to vote, that information would be provided to the county attorney for investigation and potential prosecution.
Vice Chair Anderson?
Madam Chair, but if they sign and they say they're eligible to vote and they walk in with a driver's license, even though they're not, because we give driver's licenses to anyone in the state, they can vote if they sign that they're eligible.
Mr. Linnell?
Madam Chair, again, in this scenario where we're talking about a record that has been flagged for the CID requirement, that is the requirement that they must clear under federal law in order to be allowed to vote. It doesn't contemplate a hypothetical where someone is not otherwise eligible to vote. Is to affirm their identity as the voter. It's that they are who they say they are, that it's a match against, again, one of the databases. Ideally, that's done through the number matching with the DPS database or with the Social Security Administration. It is the other elements of being eligible to vote that the voter is attesting to and certifying at the time that they're registering and when they are casting a ballot.
Thank you. So the answer to my question is yes. Under that scenario, someone could, they get their driver's license, again, because we give them to anybody here. They register to vote. It doesn't match with the Social Security number, so they're flagged, but they come in as long as they have an ID, which is that driver's license, and they sign that they're, eligible to vote, they can vote. And they're then no longer flagged. They're on the system. Is that correct?
Mr. Linnell?
Madam Chair, if I could add and maybe stepping back from those that are flagged as CID on the roster, for anyone that's presenting documentation to register to vote, that is affirmation of their identity. The driver's license has not been used as proof of citizenship for the purposes of registering to vote. It's affirming that they are who they say they are. So right. In any of these cases where someone were to cast a ballot if they were ineligible to vote, there are also reports that are generated post-election for voters that are challenged that counties will run to show status of voters that had been updated due to the fact that they've now cast a ballot that can be reviewed and referred to the county attorney.
Okay, so the answer is yes to my question. You haven't said it, but is that correct? The answer was...
It is really interesting footage. So let me ask you this. One of the big responses from the left is they always say, it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote. Mm-hmm. This isn't an issue. People are just making this up. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed the SAVE Act twice, mm-hmm. requiring photo ID and only citizens mm-hmm. Be able to vote. Mm-hmm. The left says this isn't an issue. What would be your response to the national left that says, this isn't something that people really need to be worried about? There aren't any loopholes.
Well, if they're not worried about it, then they should just let it pass, because then, right? So, but clearly they are worried about it, from the other perspective. They're worried that it will actually, show everyone that there are people voting that shouldn't be. And so we need to get it passed. And unfortunately, it's going to have to come from the feds, and the Senate's going to have to get their act together. Maybe we've got to have the 60 senators, right? Maybe. Yeah. So, but it's got to happen because otherwise you're just going to have issues like we've seen in Minnesota and things like what I just talked about. I mean, the Iowa one I'm just floored at that. Decades he's been voting in 2 states.
Well, that's exactly right. And you know, I think one thing that makes this case, and you brought this up already, but one thing that makes this case in Minnesota even more troubling is that you don't have provisional ballots,
Right.
right? In a lot of states, you know, this issue may come up, and at least there has to be that second step for people that want to get through and vote. You've got to do something to confirm your provisional ballot, right? Show up, you know, within 3 or 4 days after the election. But you don't have that
No,
in
we
Minnesota. These are all, I have to emphasize, these are all live ballots that people get to cast. And one thing that we've seen from courts is once a ballot is cast, there is no way to undo that ballot.
Right, right. And we've had such very close elections in the state. In fact, I go back, I told you earlier, Minnesota, the House is tied. We're literally 67-67. Well, the vote or the seat that was the closest was 12 votes. 12. And it went to the other party or we would have had the majority. I mean, that's just crazy. So how many of those, it's just, and it's very frustrating. I mean, as citizens, we shouldn't be concerned about that. We should feel that our elections have integrity, that only citizens are voting. It's part of, just keeping a country that we all believe in, creating that. And so it's a big problem in this country.
Well, it is. And you bring up a really good point about that 12 vote margin, because one thing that the left always says, and also, the mainstream media, one thing they always say about election fraud and non-citizen voting is it's not enough to affect the outcome of elections.
It certainly is.
It certainly is.
Yeah. Yeah, it
That's
absolutely
right.
is. You went back and talked about the Coleman race, Norm Coleman, and the whole race there. I can't remember the number, but it was 100 votes or something statewide, and they found ballots in a trunk, and that came in last minute, and I mean just and that's how we got Al Franken as a senator, at least for the term that he was there or whatever. But that matters. It really. A lot of elections are decided by tiny little numbers.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, you've brought up Iowa several times. I mean, Marionette Miller Meeks, I mean, her vote was razor thin, her margin there in Iowa. And just so our listeners can think about this, a U.S. Senate seat was decided by 100 and something votes. Your house, right? Control of your house.
12
you said
votes.
If they would have flipped that seat, 12 votes for control of the House in Minnesota. I mean, these margins are razor thin, and what is at stake is just tremendous.
Yeah. Well,
so
I hope you can, whatever we can do to get the SAVE Act passed, because we desperately need it. So.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Nationally, we've been pushing for the SAVE Act. We just did, with some coalition partners, including the Tea Party Patriots, a national bus tour, kind of in key states where they're pushing the SAVE Act. We need to let Washington know that this is something we need fixed. But for our statewide activists, you're a legislator. What recommendations would you make? For example, people in Minnesota, but also in other states that may have, not the exact same problem, but definitely similar issues with voter ID.
Yeah. Well, we need to talk about it. We need to keep pushing here in Minnesota. And I know there's at least 10 states that the Trump administration is suing because our Secretary of State refuses to give the feds our voter roll. That's crazy. I mean, what are they hiding? You have to, they're hiding something. So, because if they won't give it, and it's so simple, I think, if the feds could, whether it's a SAVE Act or if they could, somehow you had to make sure that everyone on a voter registration roll is a citizen. You do it through Social Security or you do it through something, but there's got to be a federal database, of who are citizens, especially with how many illegal immigrants are in this country right now.
Oh, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We've held several of these podcasts lately, actually, with state legislators, and this is just coming to me. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. But in Michigan right now, the Secretary of State is refusing to comply with a subpoena from the Republican state legislature about the materials that she's giving to the county clerks across the country.
Yeah.
And we've gotten our hands on that and kind of found out that what she's telling them is these county clerks have to destroy their election records right after the election. That the Secretary of State should be the only repository of election
Wow.
records, which is very problematic,
Yeah.
knowing the Secretary of State over there. In Maine, they had this issue where 250 Amazon ballots were, or 250 live election ballots were delivered by Amazon to just a random house. And the Secretary of State is refusing to investigate that. And now here we've got Minnesota, where the Secretary of State knows that non-citizens can vote in these elections. And I guess it's not violating a law, but what we're seeing is a pattern here of secretaries of state just kind of ignoring the law, subpoenas, best practices. Is this a pattern that you're concerned about, particularly in our blue states? And what can legislators do to push back?
Yeah,
on this?
very concerning. So another thing Minnesota has is a permanent absentee ballot roll. That is new. That was also passed by the trifecta. So I'm actually signed up for that because I want to see what happens, right? To see if they, and they send me a ballot in the mail for every election, every primary, so all I have to do is I vote, I put my driver's license on there. Okay. So I only need a driver's license, and have somebody sign it. Doesn't even need to be a resident. That all they do is they just sign that they're witnessing it and it's sent in. We have been told by mailmen mostly and others that there are huge numbers of these absentee ballots going to people's homes. Maybe people have moved. Maybe there's, just in names. It's pretty simple to do it. It's easy to cheat in this state, very easy to cheat. And it's really concerning because, as states get, if a state is blue, like we have been more, here in the state, in Minnesota, they control things. They control the Secretary of State's office. They control the vehicle because Governor Walz controls that.
That's right.
They control a lot of this. And so, what can we do? We can keep making a stink, and frankly, we can get out and vote and make sure that we make some changes next time. So.
Well, that's exactly right. We always say elections matter on this podcast. One thing that I am going to keep beating the drum on is in your states, your neighboring states up there. In Michigan, the governor, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General were elected in 2018 midterms.
Yeah.
The Wisconsin governor in flips in the 2018 midterms, right? The Wisconsin governor was elected in a flip in 2018, which changed the composition of the state elections board. The architects of all of the craziness from 2020, no matter what you think happened in that election, the architects of the craziness were elected in the midterms. And we are coming up on another midterm election here.
And that's exactly the case in Minnesota too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
For Governor Walz and others. So yeah.
That's right.
So.
Representative Anderson, you've been incredibly generous with your time. This has been extremely informative. You've scared a lot of us, I think, but this is information that we need to get out there. Let me ask you this. Where can our listeners find out more about your work on the committee and find out more about what you're working on?
Well, they can reach me. I'm Rep. Hattie Anderson at State Min US. But the important committee is to take a look at the fraud committee in the House. The Republican, I say Republican, but we do have a majority of Republicans on that committee. So it is the House Fraud and Government Oversight Committee, and we are meeting constantly, having hearings, and there is so much fraud in the state. It's just incredible what's happening.
Well, then one last question. Not predictions for outcomes for 2026, but going into the midterms, election integrity wise, process wise, what can we expect out of Minnesota? How closely do we need to keep an eye on that state?
I think very close because Governor Walz is running again. So is our Attorney General, Keith Ellison. We have, both houses are up, the House and the Senate. So just about everything is on the ballot. And, they're going to want, the other side, the Democrats, they're going to, they've already shown that they will do anything they can to win an election. And so we have to absolutely be watching everything that happens. And we've got to get every Republican voter out. it's very doable. We are tied in the House, down one seat in the Senate. It's very doable. Governor Walz is not popular here anymore, and I think he's very, very vulnerable. He's running for a third term. And, Trump came within a few points of winning Minnesota. And Walz is on the ticket on the other side. So
he did. That's exactly right. Well, there you have it. Minnesota's in play, but we've got to improve the election integrity. Thanks for joining us,
thanks for
Representative
having
Anderson.
me.
This is Josh Finlay with the Election Protection Podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe. You can find us at the Election Protection Podcast on YouTube. Thanks for joining.